Can you tell me more about what you use to describe yourself?
Uh, can I?
Or some other piece if you'd rather. That's fine.
Well, I think it's sort of funny because I've just come to realize as an adult that in some spaces I'm very awkward. I think that's kind of like what leads to people saying, "Oh, you're honest about this," or you will say this and you'll just say it. Well, I think that's pretty normal, but come to find out, it's not really. So, so I made it a point to say awkward. Some people would say, you're not really like awkward. I don't mean it necessarily in a social way, but I do mean like I think differently from other people. And I'm starting to realize that I am a different type of person. So,
how do you feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, I just think it's kind of funny that you go along in life for so long thinking like I'm just like everybody else. But in reality, that's not how other people see you necessarily. Does that make sense? Like, so.
Have you shared that with your kids? That realization?
They probably already know.
If they said that to you.
No. Mm-mm.
My kids will sometimes say that when I say, just realize this. I'll say, no kidding.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What was it like? Your kids are how old now?
They're all the older ones are 30 something. So
no,
34.
Go ahead, but keep. Please,
okay, so sorry. 34, 32, and 31, or somewhere in there. And then 19 and 12.
So how many were living with you during the pandemic?
The two, the 19-year-old and the now 12-year-old. Mm-hmm.
What was that like? How did that?
It started out really sort of rocky because you don't think about this as much, during your day-to-day life. You're not really with your family that much. I mean, you really are out school and working. I mean, even when vacation is here or when summer is here, there's somewhere for everybody to go. So it was a little rocky in that we were in a very tight space at the time. And we were all there together. And the other thing that was really striking about it was how my daughter was doing virtual learning. And so she had to struggle with me physically being in a space, but not being available to her. Mm-hmm. My son, he was a teenager. So really he, didn't affect him as much in that way, but,
Do you think your relationship with the two kids who were at home would be the same if there had not been a pandemic?
More than likely not. And both kids sort of reacted to the pandemic differently. My son got more introverted because he was already an introvert, and then not having the contact with people. I don't know that he even really missed it all that much. I think it just brought him further from like wanting to socialize. My daughter, on the other hand, who's not as much of an introvert, not an introvert at all, it's like she had that desire to go out and, do more and that. And I think post pandemic, that was amplified in both of their personalities.
Mm-hmm. So you do a lot of work out in the community. How did not being able to leave your house affect that aspect of who you are?
Well, I probably was out more than I should have been during the pandemic. One of the things that was done was mask distribution during a time when people were like afraid. I mean, they were scared to be in a room with another person. And so you can look at it now and say, that was nothing. So what, you gave out masks at the dollar store on Freedom. But other people did not want to do that. They were afraid of that. So I did quite a bit of stuff like that. I did lots of things that were outdoors, such as food distribution, where people the people were in the lunch program, their kids, and so I would go up to the school and pick up lunches and deliver them to people. And so there were quite a few. To me, it was an opportunity I didn't just stay inside, but I was purposeful about what I was going out for. So, I sort of say during the pandemic, it made you prioritize like what you were willing to die for, if that makes sense. So for that, I wasn't so afraid to go out that I wasn't going to help people or that I wasn't going to go where I was needed to go. And it was just more of a, how do you say it? A calculated risk. And I took some during the pandemic.
What pushed you to take that risk?
Well, I think it's if the world is going to end tomorrow, me staying at home with a mask on or whatever it is not going to stop that process. However, if somebody is home and they don't have any food, then they may, in other words, it was sort of a question about, it was a question about what was morally right over safety. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are people who would stay in and would not volunteer at a place because they knew that they could get the coronavirus, as opposed to thinking about it like, okay, well, if I don't do this, what happens to the people involved? I'm taking a risk with coronavirus, but I know if I don't feed the people, they might starve or they may go hungry or, whatever. And that's extreme, but it's something you had to weigh.
Did it change your relationship with your community? Did you learn things that you didn't know, or did you become a resource for others that you weren't expecting?
Oh, absolutely. For one, I realized that the community needs people more than we probably think about. At the time, I was working for a large corporation, and honestly, it really bummed me out somewhat that just as the company is trying to just get people back into the office and do all of these things, that's legit, you know what I'm saying? On the other end of it, I saw my community, people struggling to find food, people, having to go to a doctor's appointment, wondering where they're going to get a mask or a face covering, and just those very basic things that other people don't even have to worry about or deal with. It was recognizing that the things that you take for granted are big things to other people. I grew up in poverty. It's not that I'm, that much removed from anything somebody else would go through in poverty in Charlotte. But I realized how removed I was from just needing basic sustenance or not having resources to get at minimum what I need, So I learned too that when you have a crisis, people are very resilient. And not just the people receiving something, but also people who have the ability to do. As I started to think about schools and solutions for what we could do in the future, I don't think the conversation about the community schools model would have made the light of day if people had not gone through the pandemic, if people had not seen the value in having a school open to its community. I think we just would have kicked the can a little bit further. Another thing is the crisis in our healthcare infrastructure. And this is, unfortunately, the coronavirus is not going to be the last thing that we see because of our environment. And if we don't fix our healthcare infrastructure, if it was worse than the coronavirus, we could have been devastated in this country and all over the world. But in this country where we're a rich nation, So it caused you to question and take steps back about where our priorities really should be as opposed to where they really are. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, for sure. Do you define the term my community the same way now as you did 2.5 years ago?
Yes, still the same. Most of the efforts that were made during the pandemic were right here on the West Side. And in fact, I can't even think of. Oh no! We did a vaccine clinic on the East Side, but for the most part, everything was central to here. There are times when I use my community interchangeably in my own mind anyway. Sometimes it just means Black folks, and that's my community. Sometimes it means the West Side, and that's my community. Sometimes it just means the block, and that's my community. So I don't know if that changed or not.
Do you think the experiences and energy, well, when George Floyd was murdered, how did that affect your experience in the community during the pandemic? How did they intersect?
So I think with the one thing that was the most striking to me about what happened with George Floyd is that I think it may have been the first time in America where people were slowed down enough to see the same thing at the same time and nearly almost make the same interpretation about what they saw. If we were out hustling and bustling and working and doing all the things, we don't have time to sit that back and critically look at something like that and really be terrorized by it or to be upset about it. And I think the George Floyd thing was not a new thing. We had similar to Rodney King, similar to so many others. Yet at the same time, it wasn't about something not similar happening or something taking place that had not happened before. It was how we all looked at it and interpreted it nearly the same. I saw more cross-cultural and cross-racial protest about that than I have ever seen in my lifetime. I saw where people who I didn't even think of would know kind of like what I do outside of work. And they called me and they said, "Hey, I know you're out working in the community. Are you okay?" Mm-hmm. People that you would never think of or that you never thought was even watching or anything. So to me, the George Floyd situation happening during the pandemic, it was an awakening for us. People wrestled with things like, what if we don't come together more as a community? What's going to be the outcome of that? I just don't think people with a high level of privilege ever examined that before until then. So the dark side of it is that yet again, you had to internalize something and sit with it about what happened. You had to think about your own life and how that scenario could happen to someone in your family. It could happen to your child. It could happen to, even when I see pictures of George Floyd, I look at him and I think, that could be a brother from up the street. And that could be just somebody who you even know. And in fact, there are people who I personally know that have died by the hands of the police. So you still have to sit with that reality and you can't do anything about it. So, yeah.
So with that in mind, in the middle of the pandemic, how did you find, you talked about ways you supported the community, but how did you find support in those times?
Well, kind of the way I always do, which is I have a tight network of people. Some live here, some don't, that I just talk to about these things. I actually opened up quite a bit of dialogue with people that I didn't know very well about these things. And I really just found comfort and support, with my individual family. I don't really, I've been doing community work for a long time. It started side by side with my mom when I was however old, all the way up until now. And after a while, you just find your support where you find it. I can't describe that necessarily, but,
How did you all connect? Were you on the phone, on Zoom? How did you?
Oh, on the phone, on Zoom. I had one friend come by in her car and we talked to each other, like as she was at her car and we were just talking about whatever. So yeah, all kinds of ways, any way you could think of.
Have any new traditions come out of that experience?
Yes. I have family members all over the country. And I mean literally Arizona, California, Maryland, Charlotte, Cincinnati, further down into the South. And so now every holiday we have like a family Zoom. So there's like, sometimes on the lower end, there's 5 or 6. On the higher end, there's 20 something people on this here Zoom. And we keep inviting people in as we discover, more people. So that's been kind of neat to see my uncles age before my very eyes. So yeah.
Talk to me about the journeys you've been on. Are there any part of those journeys that you'd like to share?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Let me think of one. No. So one of the things has been that I was a part of a great resignation, if you will. And I kind of alluded to it earlier where I saw how, in corporate America, we're focused on this, but really I saw my neighbors in the community not focused on any of that over there, but over here. And I started to really think about what my passions are. And also, if we're going to be in a pandemic in 5 years from now, is that the space that I want to be in? Some people who are still out there in corporate America hear me say that and they think that I'm saying corporate America is a dirty place. No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying for a season and a given time, it helped me feed my family. I have friends that still are out there. But I'm in a space now to where I can in other words, it may put me on this journey to really think about what my passions were and to say, this is important for now, not till I retire, not until 20 years from now. And it's attainable. It's not that impossible. Particularly when we went through this pandemic and they slashed our salaries. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's really tight. But guess what? I could take a salary slash and I can make it.
Yeah. They taught you how to resign.
They taught me how to resign. And so I've been on this, and when I first made the switch, it was sort of like I'm still unlearning certain things about the corporate culture and this newfound culture of freedom, the ability to, go teach a class at UNC Charlotte, the ability to accept when someone cares about my children and care about, sort of what I'm going through personally, because a lot of those things, not that they didn't matter, but people didn't focus on them. They were there to make their money, go home, do all the things. So I feel like it put me into kind of an early retirement, if you will, a paid retirement, no doubt. So that's been really good.
And what are some of the things things right now that you're giving your heart and your time to?
Well, for one, the organization that I work for, QC Family Tree, this has been an organization that was built from wanting to care, connect, and love the community. And now it's an organization that has another ask, which is liberating the community. Now we struggle sometimes on how do we do that and what does that look like and how does that work within this framework of all the things that we have to deal with. But so at this point in time, everything for me is about liberation. It's about liberation in my career, check. Liberation with my family, somewhat check. When I say family liberation, I mean like everybody is completely straight all the time. I don't know if you can ever achieve that, but we can try. And liberation around being able to be my authentic self and not have to code switch for 8 or 10 hours a day, or hearing someone say something that's really kind of like not right, and then not feeling as if I want to say something about it that I can't, or this will cost me X, Y, Z. And liberation around creating an abundant community, because we have everything we need, yet at the same time, everything we need is so far out of reach.
Tell me more about that.
So, like, as an example, our little red box we have around the corner. I watch people all throughout the day when I'm home, and people come in, they bring stuff, they take stuff back. If a person, in other words, people are food insecure here, but nobody ever goes hungry necessarily, Yet at the same time, is that the food that they should eat? Is that the healthiest food they could have? Is that the food that they wanted for dinner that night? So we have what we need, but yet it's still having an abundant community is still what we need to strive for.
That makes sense to me. What was one of the gifts that you experienced?
Well, I always say the gift of this whole awakening around having the time to really assess one's own life, having the time to assess relationships, having the time to assess where you spend your time and again, what you're willing to take that risk on. I think if people really look back at whether they stayed in, whether they chose to go do something else, that's a picture of something that's done fell out there.
Do you mind starting that sentence again for me?
Sure.
This is good. And I don't want the big thump in the middle.
Well, I think it allowed me to assess personally, relationships, and also what you're willing to take a risk on.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I bet if people look back and they took a look at what they were willing to go out of their house for during that time, or if they knew like a friend was having a celebration and they kind of either snuck over there or just went and looked from afar or whatever it was, it would tell them deeply like what they were willing to risk it for. I took the calculated risk for a variety of things. So to me, it was just learning and having the space to do it that I hadn't had in a long time.
How do you think your view of the pandemic, your feelings in the pandemic changed as regulations went from full lockdown to out of lockdown?
For one thing,
can you remember? It is so hard for me to remember March 2020.
Oh, I remember it because it went from being a the department that I worked in was very impacted by people being at work or not. And so it went from a conversation of, hey, this thing is out here and it's out in places. And, if somebody gets it, then we're going to have to close a floor down or 2 floors or whatever it is. And we really thoroughly thought that when we closed down in March, that it was going to be 6 to 8 weeks and we were all going to come back. And then when the time drug on and drug on and drug on, and then when a vaccine was available, all of the issues that brought, it brought a new set of issues, such as your employer wants to see this medical card and they want proof and they want all these different things and requirements. And so you start to think, well, how much privacy do I really have? Well, I tell people, once you take a picture and put it on Facebook, you have no privacy. Your life is out there. But it just caused, in other words, as it went on, there were just more issues that came out of it and more issues that came out of it. I still feel like it was an awakening around how much control people feel that they have over humans and human bodies, and how easily, if left unchecked, how that could impact us all. I mean, what's to say that we could say, okay, well, for everybody who got their shot, we're going to give them a tattoo on their hand. And that becomes an identifying point of who got the shot and who didn't. But is that what it would be used for 20 years from now? Is that what it would be used for 30 years from now? To me, the pandemic left me with a lot of questions around ethical concerns around information and those kinds of things. I think I got off the subject of that question, but
no, you didn't at all. I'm curious about that. How did that change how you interact with anything in particular, either individual people or social, or did your thinking?
It's sort of, it's one of those things to where so much of what you do, you have to be identified in order to do it. But it's still, I question it a lot more than I used to in terms of, I wonder what they're going to do with this later on. Like when I filed taxes and went online to look up my taxes, there's this whole facial recognition thing that's required of you now and all of that. What does that look like 20 years from now? What does that look like? And just it has really caused me to think about those things much more heavily than I used to.
Is that a conversation you feel you've had with others in the community more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had people, for the most part, people are having those same questions that I do. Maybe not as deeply as I do, but one thing that has become very apparent is a lot of people, particularly in the inner city, look to YouTube for their news. People are starting to take alternate paths around where they get their news and their information and all of those things. And I think that lends itself to an even greater importance of people interacting with each other on a regular basis, so that we can begin to bring ourselves back into society. There are people who are still not wanting to come outside. They never quite came out of the pandemic. They never quite came out of it. Whereas the moment they were like, I was out, I was back out again. With the realization that every time I go to the store, I'm taking a risk. Every time I get into my car and get out somewhere and go into a place, I'm taking a risk. Every time I talk to a neighbor, this interview is a risk. I just feel like any interaction that I take nowadays, it is a risk taking that interaction. Yet I still do it.
You can tell me about any question I ask that you don't wish to answer it. So let me preface this with that comment. Having said that, I am interested, because you are a trusted voice in the community, I'm interested from your perspective about conversations you had, your own thoughts about the vaccine and your conversations that you had with others as a trusted voice in the community.
So there is a such thing as choice. I believe heavily in choice, in personal choice, in family choice, and choice. With that, when the vaccine first became available, I was very hesitant. And yet at the same time, when neighbors called and said, hey, we need to have a vaccine clinic, I didn't hesitate to help people. If someone was to say, hey, what do you think about this here vaccine? I will tell them this is what I think. Yet you have to use your own personal judgment about what is best for you and your family. Funny conversations came up during that time, such as someone who has gotten vaccinated and they feel like this person who didn't get vaccinated is being unkind to unkind to humans, unkind to themselves, whatever. But my philosophy around that is I don't know what the side effect of this vaccine is going to be. I'm not going to tell somebody that they're dirty and rotten because they didn't take the vaccine, because I can't make any guarantees on it one way or the other. So what I elected to do was to not to bash people around getting it or bash people who got it. It's up to you. It's your personal choice about what you want to do, period. And eventually, I think a lot of people made the choice to go ahead and get the vaccine.
What influenced your decisions one way or another? Was it people you talked to, things you read? This goes back to the question before we were taping that was in your class. Where do you think your position came from?
Well, I think you have to, from a variety of places, and I'm not going to give my particular position on it.
I appreciate that. But I'm not asking, and I don't mean to be asking.
But what I will say is, the easiest thing to do is to let somebody individually figure out what that is. Mm-hmm. For me, it's the mandate of it all. Why is this a mandate? Because essentially, if you think about it like anything else, if I go out and get a vaccine and I'm covered through the vaccine because I'm covered, why do you give a care about whether I go out and get a shot? If you have this confidence in this vaccine, then, but the other piece of it is, by it being a brand new virus or a newer virus, so many people had to get the vaccine in order to weaken it and all of that. So I understand that part of it, but I also feel like some people were very extreme in their thought processes, one way or the other.
So it sounds like community conversations about the vaccine were really important.
Absolutely.
For you, along with sort of larger governmental approach and trying to understand the reason behind larger policy informed by history and other pieces of knowledge.
Right. I mean, you have in our country and in our society where people are more than willing to experiment on people. They're more than willing to violate rights. They're more than willing to do certain things without hesitation around people that are expendable. Who is that? It's poor folk. I'll just say poor folks. So in this particular community, I don't have a right to tell somebody who's in poverty that they don't have a right, they don't have a reason to fear. Because in reality, well, history has shown us, oh, you got a reason to fear. So it was, sometimes it's a matter of, it's a hard decision to make one way or the other, because you don't know you don't know what the vaccine is going to do or not do. There are all kinds of other ethical issues that you're questioning and wrestling with. And also, what should you listen to? Who should you listen to? One person was saying, you should trust science. But in reality, well, science hasn't always been a best friend to people in poverty either. You should trust, you should trust Dr. Fauci. Okay, well, Dr. Fauci works for the government, and the government hasn't always been too kind on its own people. So you really just had to figure out what risk you were willing to take. Risk being the word,
You've described a number of different situations where you've had to hold uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Vaccine is one of them, but changing jobs, school being out and having to figure those situations out. How were you with uncertainty? How'd that roll?
Well, I do, I grew up in poverty. So, there is a joke or a meme around this, but when you grow up in poverty, your whole life is based on uncertainty. It wasn't that the uncertainty didn't bother me. It was the fact of the long-term uncertainty. Because, and the difference there is, if you're in poverty, eventually somebody, or you have that hope, somebody's going to get a job. Something's going to go through for you. Something is going to hit. You praying, you hoping, you faithful. But in this situation, you didn't know how long it was going to last. And so, I guess this is the one leg up that people who have been in poverty or have struggled in oppression, is that for once, everybody was experiencing some of the same things. We had already been there and done that. So,
I really appreciate how open you've been. Is there anything you want to be sure to share for the archive that I haven't asked?
Yeah, I think as we're moving further and further away from the coronavirus being the virus that nearly wiped out whole families, and different members of our communities and people who were important to us, I think it's important to remember the people involved and to remember how I was very fortunate that I did not lose a single person that I know of in my family due to coronavirus. Yet people did lose people, and people did die for something that was the unknown. And I hope that people remember that if we made it out, we're very blessed that we made it out. And I also hope that people learned a new skill, which is really taking care of people and taking care of being that calculated risk for somebody. And so, in all of this, it was the people. The people is the reason why we're doing this whole recording. So I don't want people to forget about all those that died, all those that lost people. And also don't forget about the living, to live and to keep going, to keep pushing forward,